This recording will cover part 2 of chapter 8 from your textbook. Remember, when we left off, we talked about assessing comprehension, progress monitoring in comprehension. I showed you an example of this maze assessment or maze test, whatever you want to call it, which is a great way to measure comprehension. I believe you give these for 3 minutes to your students. I think I forgot to mention that last time, but I might be wrong about that. So that may have changed over the years. So one thing you want to remember when you're assessing and progress monitoring, you just want to make sure you do the same time every every instance that you record or that you assess, right? So if you give them a minute the first time to find the words that make sense, you'll give them a minute the next time and a minute the next time. If you do 3 minutes the first time, you'll give them 3 minutes the next time, 3 minutes the next time, 3 minutes the next time, right? As long as you're consistent, because otherwise it would not be an accurate comparison. All right, so now we want to talk about teaching comprehension. So students might have difficulty comprehending because they might have difficulty reading, but they also might have a lack of knowledge of word meanings. Some of your students might have some poor vocabularies, and they also might have inadequate background knowledge. They might not have that knowledge, coming into this new science lesson or social studies or ELA or whatever. So you want to think about specific comprehension problems and then specific treatment. So they might need some language, or excuse me, some instruction in receptive language, right? Like what they're taking in, or relating reading to background knowledge. Okay, how are you going to relate what we're reading now to what we talked about 2 weeks ago or something like that? There are also some self-questioning strategies that encourage paying attention and summarizing as they read. So some English language learners also might be at a risk for reading problems. So you want to make sure you're providing quality reading instruction to everyone, right? That tier 1 instruction, but maybe some of your ELL, English language learners, they might end up moving into tier 2 where they get a little more instruction in comprehension. You want to think about all critical elements of beginning reading, using explicit instruction. We've talked about how hard English is to learn. We want to connect the home language with language of instruction. If English is not their first language, we want to promote language development, vocabulary building, right? How can you incorporate vocabulary into everyday activities, not just when you're 20 minutes talking about these few vocabulary words? How can you really incorporate vocabulary and build their vocabulary throughout the day? And maybe think about using some peer pairing or peer tutoring, peer learning, or cooperative groups. So then a framework for reading comprehension. There's textually explicit information from text, textually implicit information that requires the background knowledge, right? That explicit is there, it's kind of in your face, it's in the text, and I'll show you an example in just a second. But then some of that textually implicit information, you're going to have to kind of, read between the lines, right? You're going to need some, or your students will need some background knowledge. And then again, scripturally implicit information is also not stated outright, and it will require some background information or background knowledge, excuse me. So aspects of comprehension based on processes required. So looking at figure 8-7, so that would be sequencing, comparing, cause, effect, applying, all of those things. And then aspects of comprehension based on the quality of information, thinking about the author's purpose, the viewpoint, fact and opinion, sources used, and assumptions made. And concept 8.6, I just wanted to make sure to show this to you. It doesn't necessarily fall right here in the PowerPoint, but make sure you're looking in the textbook, whether it's e-text or the hard copy. The textbook, it's page 200, the e-text, it's page 239. But I want you to look at this because it helps you understand reading comprehension with students who are English language learners. For each of the following questions, ask yourself whether you implement the practice never, some of the time, but not enough, or whenever needed. So you might want to, as you get out into your own classrooms, ask yourself some of these questions. Do you ask students to make predictions about what they are going to read, right? So before they read, using such features of the text as titles, pictures, and keywords. Request that students monitor the words and concepts they don't understand, make note of them, then follow up. Some teachers use like the sticky notes as their students are reading. The students can use a little sticky note, write a question, write a word that they don't understand, something like that. Do you give students adequate time and practice responding orally, right? So if you ask them a question, especially for your ELLs, and your students with learning and or behavioral problems, you want to make sure to give them that wait time so they can process the question first and then give you that answer. So make sure you're checking out and actually looking at some of these apply the concepts in the textbook. I really do think there's some really great ideas in here, and I think that they can strengthen your reading instruction, as you move into your own classrooms. And this one, I'm going to talk about this in just a second, but while I'm here, so here's a good way to structure a concept-oriented reading instruction lesson. Lots of words. So, 10 minutes, they'll practice oral reading fluency with poetry or informational books 3 days a week. 10 minutes, you're going to do a comprehension mini lesson, something like that. 15 minutes, okay? So they might have some guided reading group using text related to the conceptual theme, right, that we talked about up here. During which the teacher models, scaffolds, provides guided practice. So we've talked about a lot of that. Watch me, I'm going to model first. Oh, we're going to do some together. Okay, then 15 minutes, when the teacher's with the second reading group, students can write about information, concepts learned, and while they're with the third reading group, the students would engage in independent reading of novels for which they might have book clubs or something like that. So this is a great way to think about structuring those reading lessons. Okay, and I know I did jump ahead just a touch, but that's okay. So some other guidelines for teaching reading comprehension. You want to think about actively teaching or explicitly teaching those cognitive strategies to your students to help them improve their comprehension. So thinking about activating that background knowledge. Again, this is where you might want to pre-teach some of those critical vocabulary words before you start and they see the word for the first time. Have a little mini pre-teaching lesson where you give them some of those vocabulary words that they're going to come across in the next unit or theme or lesson or concept or whatever you're talking about. Generate questions, help them generate questions, and use some self-monitoring strategies. Clarify unclear concepts, vocabulary, graphic organizers are great, and we will talk more about those in I believe it's chapter 10. I have a whole bunch about graphic organizers. Finding the main ideas. You're going to want to provide the rationale for the strategy, model, provide feedback, independent use, generalization. Very explicit, right? We're going to learn a new strategy today. This strategy is helpful when watch me. Let's work on some together. And then you want to make sure you're engaging students in reading. Some students like to read. We want all of our students to like to read and to enjoy engaging in reading. So again, before reading, activating background knowledge, during some of those self-questioning, and after discussion and retelling. Let's talk about what happened in the story. Okay, again, students with ELLs, ask students, this is kind of what I just told you, to make predictions, pre-teach vocabulary and concepts, ask questions, and you can model how to construct some mental images. Plan language-related activities to improve understanding, and provide practice in summarizing and integrating information. Then thinking about previewing, predicting, and developing prior knowledge or activating prior knowledge. You want to set the purpose for read, motivate them, activate prior knowledge, build on that background knowledge. And, pre-teach, again, vocabulary and concepts, provide for pre-questioning, predicting, direction setting, and make reading more comprehensible for all students is really kind of our goal. So some techniques for activating relevant background knowledge. Well, you could brainstorm. And your textbook has some really great, again, this is why I continue to use this textbook. So especially, starting in chapters 8, 9, 10, and 11, there are some evidence-based practices, also those instructional activities, but these are some evidence-based practices that have been proven to work. So brainstorming is a simple procedure that is evidence-based. It has evidence that shows it works. Okay, so that's one of the evidence-based practices. There's a pre-reading plan. There's text preview. So again, evidence-based practices, there is research that has been done about these practices and it proves that these practices work. These are kind of those best practices. KWL, you all probably know what that is, right? What do I want to know? Or excuse me, what I know already, what I want to learn, and then we're going to recall what I learned. So again, take a few minutes and, make sure you're looking through these evidence-based practices in the textbook. Okay, so KWL, we talked about that. Previewing, pre-reading, pre-teaching, a lot of pre's when it comes to comprehension. So some questioning strategies we want to think about, allowing students to generate some questions. So you're going to model it first, but then you want them to generate their own questions over text that they have read. Because if they're your questions, right, the students are not going to have as much ownership. They're not really going to care. If you want to know the answer to the question, guess what? Your students are going to be like, well, that's not my question. I don't care. So thinking about how you can get them to generate their own questions. You want to think about question and answer relationships, and I'll show that to you next. Students learn to respond to two types of questions in the book, kind of that explicit in your face in the book, and then some more implicit in my head, and I'll show you that in just one second from the textbook. You want to think about some self-questioning, how can they identify the main idea, ask questions about the main idea. And I want to show you the cue cards, figure 8-12, which is not here, right here. So this is on page 247. So this is just a little frame, and here are some self-questioning strategies that they might want to ask. But then here are just some little pictures that might help them think about, okay, who? Well, I don't know what who means. Oh, wait, it must be a person. It must be who what the story's about. What? Okay, maybe an object, or maybe something's going on in the story. Where? Where is it taking place? So just these little cue cards. When? Oh, what time of day? Is it in the morning? Is it in the night? Is it 27 years ago? Whatever. Why? Well, why are we, what's going on? Why are we reading? And how? Or what's the problem? So that is, again, figure 8.12, excuse me. So then, here is 8-11. So this is those cue card for question answer relationship, or of course another acronym, y'all. You're welcome, QARs. So in the book, the answer is in the text, usually pretty easy to find, right? Sometimes right there in the same sentence. One day there was blank, 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 blank. So Jack rode a horse to school today. And the question, what did Jack ride to school today? The answer is right there, a horse. And then over here, think and search. This is called putting it together. The answer is in the story, but you need to put together different story parts to find it. Okay, so first you get some bread, second you get a knife, third you get the peanut butter. How do you make a peanut butter sandwich? Well, you might have to get rid of some of that extra information and put it together how you make a sandwich. Okay, so that's in the book, and then the next one is in my head. Okay, so this one is the answer is not in the story. So this is that implicit background knowledge, stuff like that. Thinking about what you already know, what the author tells you in the text, but maybe not directly, and how it fits together. And then there's one on my own. The answer is not in the story. You can even answer the question without reading the story. And for that one, you would need to use your own experience. Okay, so again, that is in the textbook. It is right before 8-12. Yeah, so that is right there on page 246 in chapter 8. So, thinking about those in the book versus in my head question and answer relationships, or QAR. All right, so then a couple more slides. Where am I? Okay, so then we have text structure and summarization strategies. So there's a narrative. Text structure tells a story, right? There's usually a problem, goals, event. So there's story mapping in the textbook, figure 8-14, and then story retelling. And then expository is telling information. So descriptive, compare and contrast, problem solution, argument or persuasion, right? Write to the M&M's company and tell them what color M&M they should either introduce or bring back. Argue, persuade them to bring back or introduce a pink M&M or whatever, something like that. And then some strategies are paraphrasing, restating in your own words, or the wrap strategy. I think we talked about that. Read the paragraph, ask yourself main ideas and two supporting details, and then put main idea and details into own words. And I will talk about that again in chapter 10. And summarizing, deleting trivial or unnecessary information. Okay, a couple more slides and a couple more seconds. There's also a multi-component cognitive strategy instruction, or CSI, or to teach comprehension. So you can think about using, reciprocal teaching, collaborative strategic reading, CSR. Think about ways to teach, predicting, questioning, summarizing, clarifying. The student leads first, then the teacher models being the leader first, and then the student leads. I totally made that backwards, y'all. So you could also think about using pairs or cooperative groups and look at 8-16. And then for adolescent readers, whoo, good luck. No, I'm just kidding. You want to think about ways to address their motivation, offer choices, and use technology, of course, as sources of information. All right, that's it for chapter 8. I'll see you for chapter 9.